So you want to become a writer. That's good. That's great. Welcome to the fire. Now, just so we are all clear, I myself am not a published author. I do not have any credentials. I have gotten close a few times, but there is nothing that I can substantially point to say, hey, I am actually a member of that very exclusive group. So you must take everything I say with a grain of salt. But that is not without saying that I have still not gathered a fair amount of experience and a fair amount of trial and error to know what not to do and what I could have done better. Now, I am basically sharing my own experience with you in the hopes that if you are someone who is just now starting off, or you would like to at some point in the future, that this will give you a much better understanding of the requirements that you must meet if you do in fact want to pursue writing as something, maybe not as a career, because very few people actually do that. A very small percentage of people live off just writing. This is not a wishful thinking or a follow your dreams kind of video. This is very much a video tailored to those who genuinely want to pursue writing with the intention of getting something published. This is definitely for the more hardcore oriented. Now, the first thing that you must understand if you do in fact want to become a writer is the old adage of, if you know someone who wants to be a writer, kill them now while they're happy. Seriously. Yes, it is in fact true that writing itself is very, very challenging. It will definitely humble you in more ways than one, repeatedly. If you honestly believe that you are someone who can deal with a overload of rejection, someone who can work on things for hours on end with very little gain, someone who essentially is a masochist, a sadist, whichever one is which, someone who derives pleasure from pain. Now, if the answer to that question is yes, if you do feel like you can actually sustain yourself and you can in fact undergo all of those and still continue, welcome. Now, there are a few things that you must keep in mind. You have to understand your genre. Yes, you have to read your genre, both the classics and what is currently out now. That is very important. You must know what is out now so that you know where the market is going. What I ended up doing, instead of reading more specifically in my genre, I was just reading a little bit of everyone. I was reading the classics, I was reading some people that self-published, and I only read one book from each author. I did not want to get bogged down in reading just Stephen King or reading just other people. I tried to pick a variety. Now, of course you should read a variety. You should not just stay with one author, but you should definitely read more in your genre than not. If you are to have a firm understanding of what has been done and a firm understanding of what you should do to fit within that market, then yeah, it will take a fair amount of reading. You cannot be a writer and not read avidly so that you can, one, hone your craft, and two, understand the limits within the genre that you must fit into. I understand that there's a lot of nuance to that, as there is a lot of nuance to basically everything I say, because everyone has a different strategy and everyone has a different path. But these, again, are just the tips that I thought of. You also have to have a firm understanding of word count. Regardless if this is a novel that you are working on or it's a collection of short stories, you must know in your genre what is expected word count wise. That is very incredibly important. I wish I knew that sooner. For instance, you cannot sell a science fiction novel that is 45,000 words because there is no market for that. It's not impossible to find perhaps a smaller publisher that is accepting novels at 40K plus or 50K plus. But generally speaking, these genres are very specific in the word count that is required. So you will have to understand that when you are making something, you will have to hit that word count for your genre specifically. That is incredibly important. Now, when you are first starting off, you might only start writing when you feel motivated. This is a trap. Motivation comes and goes. Discipline is forever. If you continuously wait for motivation to come and to give you the words and the encouragement that you need to sit down in front of your computer with a blank screen, you will get nothing done. What you have to do is, even when you do not feel like it, even when you are feeling like you are at a low point, you think that no matter what amount of effort you put in is not going to actually garner the results that you want, you must in fact still sit in front of that computer and put words on the page. Or, edit them. Because nothing gets done unless you do it. No one is going to write the book for you. No one is going to write the short story for you. You have to do everything. You have to be your own boss, and you have to set a schedule, and the best way of doing it is to just make it a habit. If you just have a set time where no matter what happens during the day, that is your time to do nothing but write, and you do that for a few weeks, somewhere within that time frame, you will feel yourself getting into that habit where you don't even think about it anymore. For me, that's usually on weekend mornings. When I have my coffee, I got to sleep in a little, and I just wake up, I eat my breakfast, and I sit down to write. Or, if it's like a work day, maybe the time frame is like 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock, where if you just set aside that 1 hour a day to do nothing but write, over time, you would have disciplined yourself to essentially make it something that you just do. It is not something that you just do when you feel like it, it just becomes part of your daily routine. So do not wait for motivation. You must do it whether you feel like it or not. Now, let's say you are working on short stories. So you have a collection of magazines and publishers that you would like to submit to, maybe some anthologies as well. Now, when you are reading those submission guidelines, after reading so many of them at least, you will see a recurring pattern where they will say something along the lines of, hey, buy a copy of our magazine, buy our subscription, so that you can see the content that we are actually publishing. If you do not do that, your odds are greatly diminished. I made the mistake of writing the short stories that I wanted to write. I guess that's not really a mistake, but I did not read enough of the magazines that I was submitting to. So what happens is you write short stories and then you try to find the market to it. There is nothing wrong with that method, but your chances of actually getting published are diminished when you are up against people who did in fact read from those markets and they have a much more firm understanding of what is expected. But even if you do read those sample stories or you do read from the magazine itself, there is no guarantee, but it will greatly increase your chances of getting published. So do not ignore those submission guidelines when they say, hey, try reading a sample story or just buy a copy of the magazine, because it will in fact help you, versus just writing the story that you want to write and then trying to get it published that way. Again, they both work, but one is more advantageous and one is a much more strategic method to actually getting it published versus the other. Now, that all mostly pertains to trying to get short stories published. Of course, that is a writing credential. And then when you go to query your novel to agents, you have an indication to them that your writing was in fact marketable to someone else. So it does make you stand out a bit more, but even that is not a guarantee. Now, writing credentials themselves are in fact very valuable, but they are not the only thing that will make your story shine amongst the agents and editors. Your writing will do that itself. If you have good writing with good editing and good tension and good characters, that will always overpower whatever small writing credit you might have, assuming you just have like a short story or two published. So it is in fact an indicator of you as a writer, but good prose will always outweigh no writing credentials. Now, this one is more for novel writing specifically. When it comes to actually writing your novel, assuming that you have not already started, there are two basic methods for actually completing it. One is making an outline, and the other one is just writing it off the top. The two distinctions are the architects and the gardeners. The architects are the people who make the entire schematic of the story. They make that entire outline of exactly what happens when. And so when they start writing chapter 1, they already have an idea of what happens in chapter 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way down to the end, versus the gardeners who just have maybe a general concept or, a general spark of inspiration, and they start writing off of that. And they just kind of make it up as they go along, and wherever the story takes them is where the story goes. I myself have done both. I do not find that for me personally, one garners better results than the other. I find it incredibly fun and fulfilling to make a story out of nothing with very few things already previously conceived. What? I also find it very reassuring when I do have that outline and I know exactly what it is that I'm going to write and when I'm going to write it, and then of course you can always be adding stuff to it later. It's whatever works for you. However, the one mistake that I did make with my novel is that I wrote it, and then I made the second draft, and then I made the third draft, and then I made the fourth draft. Do you see where I'm going with this? I spent a lot of time continuously revising my novel. Now, I'm very happy with it because I revised it so much throughout all the years, and so, every time I learned something new, I would then go back and apply it. However, you will grow much more as a writer if you continuously write a new story. And that is what I did as well. I wrote draft 1 of the novel, and then I wrote some short stories, and then I wrote draft 2, and then I wrote some short stories, and then I wrote draft 3, and then I wrote, a novella, and and then my second novel's in there somewhere. So it's like, there is no straight path that I took. It was very convoluted. There were a lot of things that happened in between writing all of those drafts. But you will grow much more as a writer if you continuously write new stuff. Now, I'm not saying to write something and forget about it. What I'm saying is write something, get it completed and polished to the best of your ability, and then take a break. Step away from it, write something else, whether it's in the same genre or it's in a different genre, it does not matter. If you write something else and then you go back to that initial project, you will be able to look at it with a more objective perspective. You will be able to see where you went wrong and where and how to fix it. That is the most important part. Take a step back and then you go back to revise it again after some time has passed. You will be much more effective at making those revisions versus if you just, essentially completed the project and then you instantly tried to do the full edit again. You are too close to it. You need to detach so that you can have that objectivity and you can look at it for what it is. Okay, moving on to completion. You must complete each writing project before moving on to the next. I know that sounds so simple and it sounds so obvious, but a lot of people, when they start hitting those snags in the writing of whatever project it is that they're working on, they will then stop and go to something new because it finally got to the point where it's getting really challenging. And they might not know where to take the story. They might not know what to do next. They might just feel that their writing is not great and not want to continue for that reason. So then they go to a new project thinking that that will be better. That is a trap. Do not do that. You must stick with that one project and actually get it completed, because you can only ever submit projects that are completed. No one's taking partial novels, let me tell you. Unless you are actually a professional novelist who actually has a track record of producing things. Then they will. Until then, no. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't do like a free writing exercise, which is a very popular way of breaking up writer's block, where if you do in fact find yourself stuck and you do not know where to take the novel or short story, then sure, you can do a free write of something else where you just try to write as much as you can without stopping, and it kind of breaks your mind from thinking that, oh man, my writing really sucks. You're basically allowing yourself to write really bad prose so that you can just essentially freestyle your writing. You're not too worried about what it sounds like or what it is or if it even makes sense. You're just allowing your brain to put words on the page freely, and that's a good way of breaking up the writer's block. I'm not saying you can't do that, and I'm not saying that you can't work on multiple projects at once. Like let's just say that you're writing a novel and then you also wrote a short story and then you wanted to take a small break from the novel to maybe spice up that short story. You can do those things. I'm just saying that you don't want to continuously make a new project where you only get 10% of the way through and stop. You must complete the projects that you start so that you actually have a body of work. Otherwise, you will not have anything completed and you will just have a bunch of half-finished projects. But that's enough of that. That's enough of that.